Hi, I'm Geraldine Bliss, and I think we're about ready. Hi, everybody. I think we're ready to get started. Trish, would you like me to kick things off?
Absolutely. Thanks,
Okay.
Geraldine.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the open meeting of the CureSHANK Consortium. This is an annual meeting that we have intended to do every year, but I think this is only our second open meeting of the CureSHANK Consortium. We are delighted to welcome you to this meeting of the the Biomarker and Outcome Measures Consortium. Many of you already know me. I'm the president and co-founder of CureSHANK. I'm also mom to Charles, who is 26 years old and has Phelan-McDermid syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. You know, the suffering of our kids has been the driving force behind our work at CureSHANK. Our co-founders are all moms. Most of our board members are moms. We work with a real sense of urgency and purpose. And that purpose is to accelerate the development of treatments for PMS. All of our programs at CureSHANK have been oriented at de-risking investment in PMS drug development and enabling academic researchers and companies alike with resources to support your work. So today we want to update you on where we are. We have some new programs and resources that are intended to help de-risk the continuum of commercial development stages. If there's time at the end today, we'll take your questions, and we are, of course, always willing to set up an individual call with you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anna Mingorance, who is CureSHANK's Chief of Translational Science.
Thank you. And at some point, I'll ask whoever's controlling this to click once, but not yet. I just wanted to join Geraldine and Trish and the entire team and welcome you all. CureSHANK was created to accelerate. That's why we use that word in the title here, accelerate PMS treatments. And for that, we have many projects ongoing that go from, I wrote here, from cage to market. So all the way from creating new preclinical models to working on more translational like biomarkers, clinical and regulatory space, supporting you, helping create new outcome measures or capture the disease as it presents. And even going a bit more in the commercial direction, helping clarify incidence, burden of illness studies, all of that. And through all of this, what we want to do is to make the work of the companies as easy as possible. And please click once, because we started twice. We had too many projects to list, but the main message is that we have started the consortium to work directly with companies, and you'll be happy to hear, I'm happy to know that there are 13 different companies registered to this symposium, to this meeting. So if you're here, we want you to join the consortium. And that's the main reason we're hosting this open meeting. So today we're going to review with you and the general audience some of these activities. If you notice some important gap, like look at all the things in the slide, if there's something important in the field that you think is missing that we're not doing, let us know, because we're building all of this for you and ideally through the consortium also with you. And on that, I'll pass the presentation to Trish, who's going to introduce the agenda.
Thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate that. Good day, everyone. I'm Trish, and I work with the CureSHANK Biomarkers and Outcome Measures Consortium, and I'd like to highlight the agenda that we'll be discussing today. And if you could advance the slide, thank you. We'll be discussing more about the consortium's work later on in the call. But first, we would like to share with you updates and activities that CureSHANK is currently involved in, including the planning of a drug development symposium this summer in Europe, awareness activities, a service to obtain a license-free mouse, biomarkers efforts, and a burden of illness proposal. And we'll review these updates with you first, and then we'll discuss the CureSHANK Consortium's activities and offer an opportunity for questions. And so Geraldine will start us off with CureSHANK updates. Geraldine?
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, you think I'd have this figured out by now. Our first update is on our upcoming symposium in Barcelona. Brandon, can you forward it to the next slide? Okay. Here we go. It is going to be held June 26th and 27th in Barcelona. It is the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Drug Development Symposium. We're going to cover a variety of topics. We'll have some just kind of broad overviews of Phelan-McDermid syndrome, clinical outcome measures that are being used and are in development, biomarkers, preclinical assays, and electrophysiological biomarkers. Kind of a brief overview of the PMS pipeline with presentations from some of the companies and the academic scientists behind the trials. And then our big topic is going to be European Union trials readiness and discussion about a potential trials network. We would love to see you all there. You can obtain more information by scanning the QR code in the corner right there. And later this week, we'll be circulating some more information. It'll come from CureSHANK about the symposium. And I forgot to mention, we are co-organizing this event with the Spanish Association. So CureSHANK Symposium will be on the 26th and the 27th. And then the following 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, the Spanish Association will be organizing a meeting that's mostly oriented to families. And other people are also welcome to attend that as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, one more kind of fun update from me. CureSHANK is sponsoring a new event, an awareness day for genetic testing called Start Genetic. Can you please forward it to the next slide? Okay. We, in the PMS community, our colleagues at the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation have about 3,600 individuals, diagnosed individuals whose families are part of their membership. We know that that figure is really just the very tip of the iceberg. When we look at the prevalence of PMS in like large autism cohort studies, we see that it's really about 2% of all individuals who have both autism and intellectual disability. And that translates to a prevalence of about 1 in 15,000. So one of the questions we get is, well, if it's that common, how come there aren't more patients diagnosed? And the problem is that the vast majority of people with autism and intellectual disability, sometimes even epilepsy, are not referred for genetic testing, or they don't have the genetic testing done. Last year at our symposium in Boston, Tess Levy from the Seaver Autism Center mentioned that fewer than 20% of individuals with autism actually undergo genetic testing. So we sort of want to flip the script a little bit, and we want to empower families, just families whose kids are out there in the world of autism, epilepsy, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, or any other medical conditions, to start talking about genetics and about genetic testing. And when a parent, a mom, is probably likely a mom, is wondering about her child's development or delayed speech, we want to equip her with knowledge to like have those conversations with her loved ones and with the pediatrician and other specialists they might see about genetic testing. Typically in the past, families have to wait until a doctor refers them to genetic testing. And we want to really encourage people to kind of have a little bit of agency about that, to have the knowledge they need to initiate that conversation, and even push back a little bit if sometimes their doctor is not willing to help write the orders for genetic testing. So this is a campaign that we're going to undertake with hopefully hundreds of our colleagues at other rare disease patient advocacy groups. We've put together an advisory board that includes many of our colleagues at other advocacy groups, including some of the big ones like Global Genes, Agenda for Autism, the Rare Epilepsy Network, Combined Brain, and many other patient advocacy groups. So on July 25th, remember July 25th is the birthday of Rosalind Franklin, who helped to make discoveries about the structure of DNA. She was never really recognized or she was never given a Nobel Prize for her contribution. So we all remember Crick and Watson, but we don't remember Rosalind Franklin. So we're gonna we're gonna try to give her a little credit where credit is due. We're gonna celebrate Start Genetic annually on July 25th. And our hope this year is that we can engage hundreds of disease groups in talking about why having a genetic diagnosis is so helpful, and how it gives families a sense of community, it gives them support, and it can help them sometimes access precision treatment. It can help them access better care or give them access to clinical care guidelines. So for many reasons, even if there's not yet a cure for the disease, there's value in having that genetic diagnosis. So we'll let the patient advocacy groups talk about all the great things they're doing. They'll use the hashtag StartGenetic, and then we'll have some frames and sort of social media kits that we'll distribute to any of the patient advocacy groups that want to participate. CureSHANK will, of course, be participating and posting a lot. We hope that all of you will help amplify our posts, like them, repost them, comment on them. And if you're willing, you yourself, you're welcome to post that day, share stories of what you're doing, the work, the treatments you're working on, or families that that you've met who need treatment. So we certainly welcome your participation in this. We'll have more information coming. The Start Genetic website will go live on July 3rd. Here in a few weeks, we'll have some information available on CureSHANK's website. That'll be the temporary home until the Start Genetic website is live. So we're looking forward to this. I think that's it for Start Genetic, and I think that is it for me, and I believe I'm transferring it back over to Anna now.
Yes, that's me. So I'm going to start telling you, and if we move to the next, about a project that I believe we have not spoken in public about yet. So you're getting here the sneak peek. The press release will go out during the Symposium in Barcelona. And this is a project we started working on last year in the frame of removing barriers to drug development in CDD, which is to recreate a license-free version of the gold standard mouse model for PMS that we have, the exon 4 to 22 deletion. We know this was a barrier for companies before that chose to do all the diseases or simply to not start projects in PMS. And we're close to having those mice ready. They'll be fully open access for industry and academia, but what we're more excited about is that we're working to set up a preclinical testing service that will be in partnership with the CRO, so that companies mainly can have access to industry quality preclinical testing services that will try to actually match with the clinical outcomes that we're working on. This will be fee per service, no strings attached. And we'll make the official announcement in June during the conference, because at that point, we will have already selected the CRO that is going to be our partner. The service itself will be available next year. The mice will be available later this year. And so far, the feedback that we got from industry, from the companies, is really, really positive. So we're very excited about this one. And if you move next to the next project, because it's also on me to give you that update. Yeah, and next one more. This project is actually under the consortium. So I guess it will be more interesting or more fitting for the meeting. And we're currently in the Biomarker and Outcome Measure Consortium working on defining a study on fluid biomarkers. I guess you all know fluid biomarker is like a blood test to know what's happening in the brain. And we're currently defining the content of this because it's a project with multiple sub-projects. One of the things that we will build that we're calling here target engagement biomarker is a method to measure SHANK3 levels in blood, also potentially in CSF. This is particularly important for those projects that can target the SHANK3 gene or come with a new copy of the SHANK3 gene and provide more levels of SHANK3 so that we can see more levels of SHANK3. And the second type of project that we're looking at is to look at other proteins that can tell us what's happening in the brain when looking at a blood test. Those are disease biomarkers. And we will be running large studies, and by large, we're looking, I think, at more than 100 patient samples and controls, starting by potentially expanding to smaller studies that have already been happening, that have candidate plasma markers. Those are like promising, but still to be solidly proven potential fluid biomarkers. And we want to then get regulatory input and potentially qualification for this. If you click next, I believe this is the ideal type of project to do together because it makes sense to combine our brains so that we can get it right, co-fund the study, and also make it a joint effort. And here, this is also invitation to all the non-industry, so all the academic and the researchers in the call. But also importantly, that bottom icon there, by doing it together, we want to make sure that the outcomes of this are open access. We don't want to have one company figure out a good method to measure SHANK3 and then patent that. That has happened in a very close disorder to ours, or get an exclusive deal with the labs that can actually measure those proteins. So we want to remove the barrier, make sure that what we're building will advance the whole field. And that's what we're doing in this project. I think I now have to pass it on to, I don't remember. Huh.
Yes, I'm back to tell you about our next project. I am excited to introduce you to Sheila Szabo and Suzanne McMullen. They are from Broad Street. It's a health economic and outcomes research company. I was concerned. I looked up some of the economic cost figures for Phelan-McDermid syndrome. They don't exist. There are some figures for rare disease, and when I looked at them, I laughed. I thought they were absolutely much too low, much lower than the actual cost of caring for a child with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. I also looked at the cost for Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome, and I am pretty confident that the costs of Phelan-McDermid syndrome are a lot higher than those published costs as well. So I've kind of begun to think about like the value of having better economic sort of estimates of what it really does cost to care for an individual with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, a number that really is more accurate than what might be out there, and that really reflects both the direct and the indirect costs of Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So I'm happy now to turn it over to Sheila and Suzanne to tell you about a project that we would like to do.
Thanks, Geraldine. So my name's Sheila. I'm the head of a company called Broad Street HEOR. So I'm an epidemiologist by training, but we do health economics and outcomes research broadly. So usually our work tends to come in relatively late in the regulatory and reimbursement pathway, but we always recommend to our collaborators to start early, and Geraldine can be commended for doing exactly that. It takes a long time to put these pieces together and to figure out the story, and the earlier that we start, the better. So if we could advance to the next slide, please. So I think everyone on the call knows this part of the story. So PMS, of course, is a rare genetic disorder caused by deletions or mutations in the SHANK gene. It presents in infancy, affects neurologic functioning, and it results in extensive clinical manifestations. So that can include intellectual disability, feeding and speech difficulties, sleep disturbances, abnormal gait, and epilepsy. So lots of clinical manifestations, and as Geraldine highlighted, with lots of costs to manage these from both the family and the societal perspective. Next slide, please. So as we've also been talking about, currently there's no direct treatment for PMS, only for the supportive management of clinical manifestations, and individuals require multidisciplinary care for management. So the severity of the symptoms paired with the lack of available treatments contributes to a considerable quality of life and economic impact to patients, families, caregivers, and society. For these new gene therapies that are under development, to help understand their value, we need to better understand what the current burden of the condition is, and that burden that could be offset by the implementation of a new therapy. So at present, there are very few data available that can help quantify the burden of PMS. And in addition to capturing the burden of illness, we also want to better understand gaps in diagnosis and care, because that can help understand the unmet need that would be helped by these new treatments from the societal or family perspective. So what we're aiming to do here is to quantify the direct and indirect economic burden associated with PMS in the US. Next slide, please. So what will we do? We're planning to develop a burden of illness model, or a BOI model, for PMS. And what BOI models do is they integrate estimates of the burden experienced by patients, their families, and healthcare systems from multiple sources. They translate those estimates of burden into an economic estimate and present a summary estimate of the totality of costs required to manage a healthcare condition from, for example, a national or global perspective. So there's an example here on the right, and this is from a rare disease a report where they did a burden of illness model to try to understand the total economic burden of all rare diseases in the US. And they estimated in 2019 that the burden of managing rare diseases is $966 billion. And then you can see by the circles the different aspects or components that are contributing to that overall burden. So the biggest ones for managing rare diseases are absenteeism and presenteeism, which is the impact to families and to patients on work and their ability to work due to their health condition, closely followed by, for example, inpatient expenses, so costs of going to the hospital to manage their complications. So these are exactly the type of data we want to understand better for PMS. What are the component costs that are driving the overall economic burden, considering patient perspectives, considering caregiver perspectives, and direct medical resource use, and aggregating those into a total estimate for PMS. So the results will give context to aspects of the challenges experienced by those affected by PMS. And then we also are planning to publish the findings to help bring awareness to the magnitude of the burden and have a kind of documented estimate in the scientific literature that's credible. Next slide, please. So a bit more about the project in general. What we will be doing is characterizing aspects of the direct and indirect burden of PMS from the perspective of patients and caregivers in the US, as well as the healthcare system. And to do that, we are going to conduct a number of different data collection exercises. And a BOI model is a really nice approach. It's very flexible and you can always add to it. So if you have a better estimate later, then you can add that in and update your costs, essentially. So we'll be conducting a survey of caregivers about their experience, their costs, and their perceptions of the impact of caring for people with PMS. We'll look at health insurance claims data to understand costs from the insurer's perspective and from the healthcare system perspective. We'll review the published literature to understand estimates of the burden, and we'll validate and augment all of these data with data from patient experts, with data from CureSHANK, and with data from any clinical experts that participate. We'll use those data to construct an Excel-based model, so it'll be very flexible and also something that people can readily engage with, and that will estimate the total economic burden, considering things like direct medical, indirect, out-of-pocket, caregiving, and non-medical costs, as well as any other costs that get identified from consultation with our stakeholders. And we'll produce a beautiful looking tool that you can use to talk to stakeholders about these costs and manipulate different costs and see what the impact is on the totals estimated. And as I noted, we'll also produce a manuscript. So hopefully what this project will do is to help highlight the size of the burden of PMS to patients, caregivers, in the healthcare system. It will identify key drivers of that burden to help highlight targets for future interventions. It'll provide a roadmap for future health economic research into the burden of PMS, and it will provide support for the value of new therapies for PMS. And on our next slide, it just shows the timelines that we're working with. We're aiming to kick this project off shortly. We'll be conducting data collection through the summer, as well as starting to develop the model, which will continue into the fall and winter. And then in the early part of next year, be developing the publications to help communicate the findings of this study. Geraldine, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I just want to make sure that any of our colleagues in industry who are on the call today know that they are welcome to, be a partner in this project. We just let us know if you're interested in this. We welcome your participation. Yeah.
And if anyone has any questions on the methods or any of the potential outputs, we'd be happy to discuss, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are turning it over to Trish right now. Trish is, oh, good, you're here.
Thank you. Thanks, Geraldine. Yes, we have some exciting updates to provide to you about the activities within the CureSHANK Biomarkers and Outcome Measures Consortium. It is my pleasure to introduce Alex Kolopsel of the Seaver Autism Center in Mount Sinai, and Alex serves as an advisor to the CureSHANK Consortium. Alex will be talking about the consortium's first project and our next steps to develop a PMS-focused clinical outcome assessment. Alex?
Thanks, Trish.
Thank
This is a big group. I'm so impressed with the level of interest. I'm not driving my slides. You're driving my slides, right? Yeah. So CureSHANK has been remarkably forward-thinking. I mean, to the point where actually it was Geraldine who encouraged me to apply for this grant that created the natural history study. So we now have almost 10 years, more than 10 years of really valuable data characterizing the Phelan-McDermid syndrome phenotype across the lifespan and really understanding the natural history. So CureSHANK, was very strategic in their thinking, and we have this enormous database now and all these kids characterized. And the whole goal of this project was really for clinical trial readiness. But you can see our kind of broad aims here, and we've had a lot of success in achieving these aims, but we really didn't think as carefully about what it was going to take to bring potentially new treatments to trial. And one of the most critical steps is to have a really good clinical outcome assessment. And so within the context of this study, and actually let's go to the next slide. We've seen more than 200 patients across 5 sites, and some have been seen as many as 5 different times over annual visits, essentially. And we've administered a whole battery of assessments. And so clinical outcome assessment can mean a lot of different things. In the context of clinical trials, it's most often a parent report tool that's meant to track change in symptoms. And that's kind of very broad, right? And the symptoms could be behavioral symptoms or physical symptoms or sleep symptoms. So there's a lot of things that we're tracking. And next slide. We've studied, oh, you guys changed my slides a little bit. That looks nice. We've studied a number of the tools that we kind of borrowed from other areas within autism or other neurodevelopmental disorders. And we applied them to this natural history study to try to see, how good is this tool at picking up behaviors in Phelan-McDermid syndrome, because none of them were really developed for the Phelan-McDermid syndrome phenotype. And we know this phenotype is very heterogeneous. We know that most of these kids are minimally verbal. We know that they have intellectual disabilities. So really what ends up happening is many of the questions that are asked in these various scales don't do a great job of really capturing the Phelan-McDermid syndrome phenotype. And so we did a little bit of work sort of assessing the performance of these scales and ruling out some scales. And then we did a little bit of work developing new scales that we thought would be more appropriate to the phenotype, including this one on the bottom right, which is called the SAND. It's a clinician-administered observation and caregiver interview called the Sensory Assessment for Neurodevelopmental Disorders. It was developed by Paige Cyper and Teresa Tavasoli. Next slide. And so this is kind of modeled after the ADOS, actually, where you're introducing various toys to kids and you're assessing them across different sensory domains, auditory, visual, tactile, and you're measuring their hyperreactivity to these sensory stimuli, hyporeactivity, and then sensory seeking. And it's been a really kind of nice measure, and it's relevant across different neurodevelopmental disorders. And we've tested it now in our natural history study. And we know that it's a good tool to measure sensory symptoms in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And we also expect that it's going to be sensitive to change over the course of time with treatment, which is obviously a critical feature of a clinical outcome assessment. Next slide, please. Audrey Thurm has spent a lot of time looking at regression and developed the loss survey. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. And we're in the middle of testing that in the context of the natural history study. Next slide. We spent a lot of time thinking about neuropsychiatric symptoms. We developed an inventory for neuropsychiatric symptoms that was supported by the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. And we're in the middle of kind of refining this tool to make it a little bit more caregiver friendly. And we're learning a lot about the way that different features cluster and how believe it or not, the kids with Phelan-McDermid syndrome do not read the diagnostic manual, so they don't necessarily fall into these kind of typical psychiatric diagnoses that we use. So we're trying to think about how better to kind of characterize these features, and then of course it'll be relevant to treatment eventually. Next slide. So thinking about fast forwarding, we've got this perfect molecule or this potentially perfect gene therapy. How are we going to measure change in behavior and clinically meaningful outcomes, which is absolutely important to the FDA, right? You need to identify a primary outcome. And a lot of discussion has occurred, and a lot of academic centers and pharmaceutical companies have tried to bring forward various outcome assessments to the FDA. And every couple of years, there's a kind of a new assessment that's kind of in favor. And frankly, none of them to date have been especially relevant to the Phelan-McDermid syndrome phenotype. And they've really kind of fallen short in terms of both sensitivity and relevance. Neuron did a really nice job developing a clinical global assessment that measures improvement and severity. And we had very high hopes for that to be like a really ideal primary outcome. And I think you've all now heard that it'll be a co-primary in the upcoming Neuron trial. But we're really interested in developing a kind of a sole primary clinical outcome assessment that captures the phenotype, that's sensitive to change, that's tolerable for families to fill out, that's relevant. And so what we did is we looked at all the different measures we collected in the natural history study. And we thought about which ones were sort of most relevant and captured behavior in ways that we thought would be strategic. And we picked these 4. So the aberrant behavior checklist, which has different domains, which include irritability, hyperactivity, social withdrawal, motor stereotypies, and inappropriate speech. The repetitive behavior scale, which kind of groups various repetitive and restrictive behaviors into different domains. The sensory profile, which has a whole range of sensory symptoms on it. And then, of course, sleep, which we know is absolutely critical to our kids. We partly selected these measures because, well, A, we've collected them, but B, we know that they're considered to be clinically meaningful to families and to clinicians as well. Next slide. Within each of these measures, there's a lot of different items, and so it can be quite burdensome to fill out. So one of our goals is obviously to try to whittle this down a little bit. So there's a total of 161 items across all 4 of these scales. So it's a really enormous amount of data. Next slide. And then looking at how much data we've actually collected over the natural history study. This is like a sort of a treasure trove of data. We have visits at baseline year 1, 2, 3, 4 for 3 of the measures, and then baseline year 1 and 2 for 1 of the measures, the sleep habits questionnaire. And with each kind of successive visit, there's some degree of attrition, but we still have an enormous amount of data. So we will really have a good sense of how these scales and these items behave over time. I'm going to give you kind of a quick look into kind of our initial conversations. I've been working with Tess Levy, who is a genetic counselor at our group. I think she might be on this call, and Kristen Farmer, who's a biostatistician at the NIH. And we're thinking about how to apply sort of a data analytic approach to this and create, a really ideal scale. Next slide. So this is Tess put this together for me. So basically, this is just a couple of snippets just to give you a sense of what we're trying to do. So if you look at the aberrant behavior checklist, the RBS, the SSP, the sleep habits questionnaire, and you just look at how parents respond to the various items. So they've got this, in total 161 items. And you can see if you just look at the top row, that some items parents will say 88% of the time, this is not a problem at all. So that's an item that you can actually say, that's probably not a great item to have in a scale that we're trying to use to measure change in the context of a clinical trial. And you can set the threshold at different levels. We're thinking, 75% of parents say that this is not a problem at all. This is probably not an item that we want to include in our final measure. And we did that across all the different measures and across all the different items. And this is just sort of a first pass to see how patients respond, and also to see the distribution of responses, because that's also important. Next slide. Tess took a look at how items correlate with one another. So we don't want to have too many redundant items. Many parents find themselves burdened by these measures, even irritated by these measures when you ask the same question over and over again, especially if a question isn't especially relevant to the to the child that you're supposed to be answering the question about. So we looked at correlations across items in an effort to try to, again, whittle it down. Next slide. And if you look at some of these items, this is all even within the aberrant behavior checklist, and you look at the correlation between the items in the far right-hand column, items that are like, 0.87, right? That's a very, very high correlation. And if you look at number, let's see, 22 on the right, sorry, 22 on the left, which is sort of halfway down the page, you probably can't see my pointer, but repetitive speech and repeats a word or phrase over and over again, right? Those are items that we can probably eliminate at least one of them. So that's another thing we're trying to do to create this better tool. We want it to be more user-friendly, less burdensome, and again, we want all the questions to be at least mostly relevant to the people that we're asking them about. Next slide. So then the next step is going to be to try to fit the questions into domains, and of course, we want the domains to reflect what we know is important to the community. And CureSHANK in this case has also been very forward-thinking and having developed a PMS conceptual model, and we're able to map these questions onto these specific domains. And so we'll be able to eventually go to the FDA and say, hey, we are absolutely certain that these are clinical meaningful domains because we've surveyed the patient population. We know that these are important to parents, and many of the important signs may not be necessarily behavioral. So we're not developing a scale for all the symptoms. We're developing a scale for behavioral symptoms in particular. But you can see on the left that many of those symptoms under autism spectrum disorder are relevant. Many of the symptoms under neuropsychiatric signs are relevant. Of course, sleep is relevant. Sensory activity is relevant. So we're going to be able to map onto all these domains. Next slide. So next steps, we're going to eliminate the redundant items, as I said. We're going to group items into domains and align with the PMS conceptual model. We'll run some fancy statistical analyses like exploratory factors and see if things group according to the way we would predict they will. We'll look much more carefully at item responses to see if the specific items are actually performing the way we expect them to, and there's kind of a nice distribution across item responses. A critical step is going to be to refine the language because we want them to be parent-friendly. We want them to understand what the questions are. We want these to be a measure that you don't need training to fill out, that you don't need coaching to fill out, that you can just literally, do it as a survey. And then we're going to seek both expert and parent and stakeholder advice about how the measure looks, how it feels to complete. Does it reflect important symptoms? Does it feel relevant to their child? All those things are going to really help us refine it. And then we're going to test it eventually. I think that's my last slide. Next slide. Yeah, and these are the people that have been working in the natural history study and helping us with consultations to the community and doing all kinds of really important science and being highly committed to the kids. Next slide. These are the kids. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Alex. Appreciate it. We'll have time for questions in just a few minutes. We wanted to share with you some information about the CureSHANK Biomarkers and Outcome Measures Consortium. Anna, will you take it away?
Yeah, if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, this is the part of the meeting where I tell you again that we would like you to join the consortium. And that's the reason we're holding this open meeting. All the work that we do is to de-risk the space and therefore accelerate the development of your treatments, because that's what we want. And we want to make the work of the companies as easy as possible. We're building all this for you, and as much as we can, we hope that also with you. And therefore, this invitation to join the consortium. Trish will explain us in a few slides how the consortium works.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
quick.
Next slide, please. Great. Thank you so much. Well, you heard Alex talk about one of the projects that the consortium is working on, and I wanted to just give you a sense of what our mission is, and also the structure and how the consortium operates. So our mission is right here on the page: to facilitate a cooperative, globally aligned effort focused on the identification and development of novel approaches to enable successful clinical trials. And next slide, please. And here's how we do it. The CureSHANK Consortium has an executive committee and a steering committee, and then project teams. And the project that Alex was talking about is under the project teams that you see here on the screen. And Alex is one of our advisors. You'll see that on our structure on the slide. The consortium is convened and overseen by CureSHANK, representing the interest of the Phelan-McDermid syndrome patient community. The executive committee is responsible for the consortium's mission, vision, strategy, and governance. And so companies can participate in the consortium as members of the steering committee of the consortium. And right now we have about 4 companies who've actively taken part in shaping the direction of the outcomes project that Alex discussed. And we're hoping to expand consortium membership to interested companies. And so we invite companies to contact us and learn more about the consortium. Companies can participate in projects, they can present project ideas. And if you're interested in learning more, please reach out to us and we'll set up a time with you to talk further. And I wanted to turn this back over to Anna or to Geraldine for any final thoughts and then for questions.
Well, Geraldine, if you don't, we didn't think we're gonna be so fast. So we actually have like 15 minutes for questions and we're not prepared for this. We'll be prepared to answer if you have any questions.
And if you can go to the next slide, there's some information about how to reach out to us. And so I know maybe folks might have questions based on Alex's presentation or based on the CureSHANK updates. Feel free to put it in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask us. Thank you.
I don't have a question,
Potentially
but I
we
have a
can
comment.
stop sharing so we can see each other if there are going to be questions. Might be easier. Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, which is, Alex, thanks so much for your work. Thanks to you and Tess and Kristen. We're super excited about the project you're working on right now. And as a parent, what I love about it is, you're using data that was really contributed by a lot of families over the years. Data that's not easy for families to share. There's a lot of questions. It's very onerous to go through everything. It's very time consuming. And I just remember like Charles playing on the floor trying to stick things into the electrical socket while I was trying to answer all the questions. What I love about the project though is now you're going to take that data and turn it into something that's going to make the lives of families a lot easier. So we're really grateful for that. And also grateful to have a new measure that is actually relevant to PMS. Any questions? Just, I don't know if anybody has any other ideas for projects you think the consortium should undertake. We're open to your suggestions. We welcome the input. I mean, a big kind of I guess premise behind the consortium is that working together we can be a lot more efficient, right? And if there's like one particular company or investigator that is struggling with a particular challenge, it's very likely that other people are also. And if we can kind of pool our resources and our, ideas, we may be able to work a little bit faster, more efficiently, more cost effectively, and in the end, be able to help bring treatments to patients quicker.
And if there were no questions now, we can give the last 10 minutes back to everybody's days. We are available for any questions, comments from the researchers and academics. If you're interested in some of the projects, how it's working, you want to participate, you can reach out to us. It's not just for the companies. The main topic was the consortium, and therefore we're addressing the companies, but we're building together with the rest of the community. Just reach out, and that's it.
Anna, I have a question.
Hey.
Thank you for first thing, thank you for the excellent meeting and all the excellent work that you all are doing. My question's for Alex. Do you have an estimated timeline on the Outcomes project, next steps?
Thinking next Thursday, Dan. Does that work for you? Yeah, I think well, to have a measure that's developed and ready to test. Where's Tess? Tess is on a call. I want to say 3 months. I want to say, what do you think, Tess? 3 months?
3 months?
Because we also have to get caregiver feedback. I mean, you know, these things, I should say that it took us almost, you know, a year with CureSHANK support to actually cull the data from the database and clean it in a way that it was ready for analysis. So it's now all cleaned. I think the steps that you heard me describe are the ones that we have left, and I don't think it should take us more than 3 months to be ready to test. And I'd rather, you know, under promise and over deliver.
And then Alex, will next steps be to test that within the natural history population?
I would like to test in the natural history population, and I think if Neuron allows us, I'd like to test it in the Neuron trial. I mean, any trial that's going on, we are, you know, I mean, I maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but we are sharing, and we would like everyone to be using this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Including Jaguar. I don't know if Jaguar is involved, but.
Any other questions? If not, I think we will give you 10 minutes back in your day. We're so glad that you joined us today. Hope you got to learn some new things. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the consortium or any other things that CureSHANK is doing. If you have ideas or feedback, we're all ears. We always welcome your input and what we're doing. We use your feedback from meetings like this and our symposium coming up in Barcelona to shape our programs. We listened to what y'all were talking about last year at the symposium, and that's exactly where the Biomarker project came from. So, you know, with your input, we can really help everybody work a little bit better. That's our goal. And CureSHANK will start its strategic planning process in around September or October of this fall. And everything we hear from you, that goes into shaping our plan for next year. So don't be shy. Yeah. Okay. Any last words, Trish?
No, I think we certainly do appreciate everyone for their time on the call today. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.